Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A police report into historical claims of children being drugged and abused at a hospital in Derbyshire has said that the doctor running it would have been questioned if he were still alive today. The late Dr. Kenneth Milner would have been interviewed over rape and child cruelty claims between the 1940s and 70s when he ran Aston Hall. Former patients have described the hospital as a place of pure hell. Seema Katecha has been hearing the distressing accounts of two people who say they were abused as children.
For decades, a hospital for troubled and vulnerable children set in the Derbyshire countryside. Now, scores of allegations that Aston Hall was the scene of widespread abuse. And at the centre of those allegations, Dr. Kenneth Milner, the man in charge from 1947 till his death in 1975.
The first day there, I was put straight into a cell and all my clothes taken off me. The door opens, Dr. Milner walks in with a kidney dish with a syringe in it. I don't know what's happening.
David says he was just 12 at the time when he was plied with the so-called truth serum.
They injected me and lay down on the floor. I was on a mattress on the floor and they put a mask on my face and started to drop fluid on it, which I now know was ether, which is it's just a strong, I don't know, it's knocked you out.
Well, this is Aston Hall now. The hospital no longer exists. The building has been converted into flats. There were more red bricked buildings surrounding the mansion. They've been knocked down, and it's in those buildings where much of the alleged abuse took place. Today, a 3-year police investigation involving testimony from more than 100 witnesses concluded that if Dr. Milner was alive, he would be questioned about potential offences, including rape and child cruelty. In a report, officers say treatment methods at Aston Hall Hospital are known to have included sedation, where young people were put to sleep to allow for memory testing. This involved interviewing patients in a drug-induced state in order that they recall thoughts and feelings that they would normally conceal. The man who led the investigation says the authorities are now in a much better place.
We've got really strong safeguarding, and it's not only around being able to monitor those in those positions, but it's also that there's now an avenue for the voice of the victim to be heard.
Why has it taken this long for these allegations to come to light?
Well, Derbyshire Police didn't know anything about it till 2011, so it's difficult for us to comment really around what occurred then.
The police have repeatedly said no inference can be drawn as to Mr. Milner's guilt. Even though the doctor has died, in the minds of many of his accusers, he remains very much alive.
It's a period of recovery. And it's going to be, probably the rest of my life is going to be a period of recovery. There'll never be closure. Your childhood is stolen and you can't replace it.
And that was Seema Katecha reporting. Well, our home editor Mark Easton is here with me now. Mark, very disturbing claims here that suggest yet again that the state has failed to protect children.
Well, but the details of this do feel like the plot from a horror film, but you're right, this is once again a story about the abuse of vulnerable children who are supposed to be looked after by the state. The Dr. Kenneth Milner was employed by the government, the institution, the hospital was part of the health service there to provide care for troubled children. Instead, scores of patients suffered physical and psychological abuse, and some indeed are still suffering today. This dark tale, I think, fits into our wider understanding of how historically British society turned a blind eye to the abuse of children by the very people and in the very places that were supposed to care for them. So schools, care homes, and now, of course, a hospital. Things, as we were hearing, are different now. I think the deference that protected many abusers has largely gone. The accountability of state institutions is much stricter. The place of children in society, their welfare is now a priority. That's created a different climate. But the stories of the survivors, the scarred victims, I think are a reminder of why this still matters so very much today.
OK, Mark, thank you.
Shocking details of abuse at a hospital in Derbyshire, which started just after the war and continued to the 1970s, have come to light today. A police report has found that 65 children were allegedly given the experimental truth drug sodium amytal. They were also stripped and abused. The allegations involved Dr. Kenneth Milner, who died in 1975. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon has met one of the survivors.
He had the power to do what he wanted to the children in his care, and a drug that made it all too easy. For almost 30 years, inside this hospital, Dr. Kenneth Milner was experimenting on his young patients, injecting them with a so-called truth serum. Now, police say, they believe children were raped while they were drugged, and if he were alive today, they'd be questioning Kenneth Milner as a suspect.
If I'm a 12-year-old kid and I'm going to what I believe to be a hospital, it turns out to be basically a children's prison.
Barbara O'Hare was 12 when she was sent to Aston Hall. She spent 8 months there, being subjected to Dr. Milner's so-called treatments.
I've had my innocence stolen, I've had my childhood stolen. Our inner selves are destroyed. You know, what more damage can this man do?
Police say they're treating 65 people as victims, and it's likely Kenneth Milner wasn't the only abuser. There've been allegations about other staff at Aston Hall too. Who they are, whether they're still alive, isn't clear. Police claim records from the time don't contain sufficient information to identify them all. There are questions too about why the investigation only started in 2015, when a number of victims had come forward before then. Back in 2011, one of this doctor's victims went to the police. Why didn't the police do anything at that point?
Well, at that time, that was the first Derbyshire police knew about it, 2011. We did do something about it. We spoke to the victim, we listened to her account. It amounted to a physical abuse. But we also established at that time that Dr. Milner had been deceased for many years.
So you would take the same decision now in the same circumstances?
Well, hindsight's great. We're at the end of an investigation now, but I would say that it was a proportionate decision to make.
Aston Hall closed down in the early 90s. Police say all these years on, they don't even know how many children were admitted there while Dr. Milner was in charge. Best guess, it could be thousands. The drug he gave them, the so-called truth serum, comes with a cruel irony that makes the truth an impossible enigma. Because the children were drugged, so it's possible there are more victims, and some may not know if they were sexually abused. How important is it to you that we try at least to find out the real scale of this?
Very important, because you know what? The knock-on effect, the heartbreak, the families that are still suffering, like my daughter crying last night, like me worried about my grandchildren seeing me on the television today talking about this, the shadow of Aston Hall affecting any one of them.
Barbara says that she is finally believed is hugely important. She wants others to speak out too. She also wants answers to questions that remain. Who knew? Could it have been stopped? And how many more victims are still out there? They didn't have any reports.
Claire Fallon reporting there.
Right, now dozens of child patients sent to Aston Hall Psychiatric Hospital in Derbyshire over a period spanning the 1950s to the 70s say they were drugged and abused there. Most levelled their accusations against their superintendent of the hospital, Kenneth Milner, who died in 1975. Well, it took decades for the patients' accounts of what had happened to reach the authorities and to be investigated. But today, Derbyshire Police finally said that if he were alive, Dr. Milner would have questions to answer under caution. Police said there would have been sufficient evidence to pursue a case. John Sweeney looks back at the history of those accusations.
Aston Hall in Derbyshire was a hospital for the mentally deficient, as they were called back then.
A small chair that Dr. Milner sat on, a canvas spread that they lay on, like a canvas mattress, and they wore a kind of restraining canvas as well, I think.
A straitjacket?
Like a straitjacket, yes. Occasionally you'd hear them crying from the room where the treatment took place.
John Bull joined Aston Hall as a nurse in 1962. Here, children under the care of psychiatrist Dr. Kenneth Milner were stripped, trussed up and drugged with sodium amytal, known then as a truth serum. Today, Derbyshire Police came up with a different kind of truth.
It was important for the police to investigate, despite knowing from the outset that Dr. Milner had died many years prior. The investigation has concluded that had Dr. Milner been alive today, he would have been interviewed as a suspect under caution.
The police heard evidence pointing to 77 crimes of both physical and sexual abuse. Barbara O'Hare was 12 years old when she got the truth serum treatment.
It was just horrendous. And then taken into this room and made to lay on a rubber mattress. I'd prefer not to go too far into that because today's a very emotional day anyway, but then I was injected with this drug, which I now know was sodium amytal. I didn't know what it was then.
An intravenous injection of sodium amytal induces a state similar to hypnosis.
Sodium amytal was used in the Second World War to treat soldiers with shell shock to recover from trauma. John Huston made a film celebrating the remedy.
You're not going to feel much of anything else.
The technique of narcoanalysis was based on the idea that when a patient received this drug, they went into a hypnotic state in which they revealed traumatic experiences. They talked through these experiences in a way that was inaccessible to them when they weren't on that drug.
It fell out of fashion after the war because there was no good scientific evidence that it worked. But sodium amytal was never supposed to be used on children.
Now, its use in child psychiatry from the 1960s would have been unheard of. There are no published papers by any kind of respected research scientist from the 60s and 70s arguing for the use of sodium amytal in the treatment of narcoanalysis of children. There's just none.
Some victims fear Dr. Milner sexually abused them. Others that he suggested false memories of family abuse. What was the former nurse's view of Dr. Milner's work?
As a person, he was a little bit like a Lord of the Manor. I haven't heard of anyone being very clear about it, actually, what he did.
Were there doubts about his conduct in the hospital at the time when you were there?
No.
Would you have been in a position, or any of your colleagues have been in a position to say, Doctor, stop this?
No.
Dr. Kenneth Milner died in 1975, but his legacy is grim. His former child patients are suing the NHS for damages. Win or lose, we now know there is solid evidence that by using sodium amytal on children, he offended against the doctor's oath. First, do no harm.
Johnson.
Children will be